Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a long-time Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at The Secret of Chimneys.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcasts. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a long-time Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided that he should read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time. Before we dive into the book itself, we thought it would be interesting to place it into the context of what was happening in the UK and the world at large when the book was published. So what was going on in 1925? So around the world, the 1925 serum run to Nome relayed diphtheria antitoxin by dog sled across the US territory of Alaska to combat an epidemic, which you may know better as the tale immortalized in the movie Balto. And we actually got to see Balto in the museum in Cleveland, didn't we? Last year?
We did. Yeah, we did, yes. The
actual doggy. Well, dead and stuff, but it was Balto. And on that lovely note, the next one, equally cheerful. The tri-state tornado, the deadliest in US history, rampaged through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing 695 people and injuring 2,027. That's crazy.
That is, especially having experienced
a tornado,
sitting out a tornado in our basement when we lived in Illinois. Yeah. I can only imagine.
I know, scary.
Yeah.
And a couple of more cheerful notes. New York City becomes the largest city in the world, taking the lead from London. Construction begins on the Mount Rushmore National Memorial on federal land in South Dakota, which we've also seen on a road trip. So I think we've been to New York, so I think we hit all four of those, didn't we?
I think we did. Yeah, I think we did.
And in the UK, in London, John Logie Baird successfully transmitted the first television pictures with a grayscale image. London's first double-decker bus with a covered top went into service. Prior to that, the double-decker buses in London had open tops. The Locarno Treaty was signed in London, which didn't have an immediate impact, would later, because in the treaty, the United Kingdom signed as a joint guarantor of the boundaries between Belgium, France, and Germany. And obviously, in the 30s, that would have a lot of significance. Anyway, Jill, on to more cheerful things. What was happening with Agatha in 1925?
Agatha and Archie finally settled on a country house close to where they'd been previously living. Archie suggested calling it Styles, and they hung the painting of the cover for the mysterious affair at Styles in the house. Agatha signed a 3-book deal with William Collins, moving away from Bodley Head, and The Secret of Chimneys was the last book to be published by Bodley Head. This is also when Charlotte Fisher, aka Carlo, entered the life of Agatha and Rosalind. She was hired to be a joint secretary, a secretary for Agatha and a governess for Rosalind.
I assume she becomes a significant ongoing member of the family?
Yes, she does.
Okay, before we jump into the book, as the podcast demonstrates, people are coming new to the works of Agatha Christie at any time and may not be familiar with all the details of the stories under discussion. So this is a spoiler warning that we will be diving into plot and character details, as well as talking about who done it and why. And with that said, let's dive into The Secret of Chimneys.
Plot synopsis. Now, this was very exciting. I read lots of different plot synopses for this. Some of them were not very short, and some of them were completely inaccurate. Even the one I felt on the Agatha Christie site was a bit inaccurate as well. So I've changed this up a bit. I felt like most of the synopsis actually laid out the whole plot, which is not what a synopsis is meant to do. So this is the mixture of the one from the Agatha Christie website and Wikipedia. A young drifter from Bulawayo finds more than he bargained for when he agrees to deliver a parcel to a publisher in London. Little did Anthony Cade suspect that a simple errand on behalf of a friend would make him the centerpiece of a murderous international conspiracy, someone who would stop at nothing to prevent the monarchy being restored in faraway Herzegovina. The combined forces of Scotland Yard and the French Sûreté can do no better than go in circles until the final murder at Chimneys, the great country estate that yields up an amazing secret. For further details, take a look at the Wikipedia page for The Secret at Chimneys. Details will be in the show notes. Right, we move on to thoughts. I'm first on the plot, and I'm kind of glad because I think Alan has a lot more to say about this than me. I thought this was a fun read. It was convoluted for sure, too many characters, but I still found it fun. I was a bit confused along the way because I felt like Bundle, Lady Eileen Caterham, in my memory had more of a prominent lead in the book, but I guess I was wrong. Oh, what a lot of side stories this one had that could also be the main story or maybe not. You know, who was on the side of the angels, who wasn't? It was all over the place for that. But for me, the tone of the writing just made this a delight to read. Although the whole country from the Baltics plot was interesting, but why do the names have to be so unpronounceable? That annoys me. If you're going to make up a country, make the names easier to remember, I guess. I must admit, I didn't care at all about the letters or the memoirs. I did enjoy Virginia Revel's reaction to the blackmail attempt. It set her character really nicely, and she continued on with that kind of attitude all the way through, which made her kind of rather game for anything. But also, interestingly, I know we're talking about plot, not characters, but I think it also made her difficult to read, which I found very interesting. While I didn't even try to figure it all out and just enjoyed the read, I do feel it was solvable. There were enough clues in there to sort it all out if you were really paying attention. Maybe had a spreadsheet or a notebook or Post-it notes or whatever, but I think it was solvable. What about you, Alan? What did you think?
Well, I think your intro to the synopsis where you couldn't find two synopses that agreed with each other, I think pretty much sums it up. For me, this was that word you used, convoluted. It was a convoluted mess of a story. As you said, so many things. What exactly was being solved and by whom? Was it the blackmail letters and the murder of the blackmail at Virginia Revel's home? Was it the theft of the memoirs manuscript? Was it about the succession crisis in the fictional country of Herzegovina? Hopefully we got that right. Or the murder of its prince. Maybe it was a case of the missing diamond, or perhaps it was a search for the French master criminal King Victor. And then we had at least 3 detectives from 3 different countries involved. Superintendent Battle from Scotland Yard, Monsieur Lamont, which of course makes me think of Miss Lemon, of the Sûreté, an American who turned out to be a secret agent, Hiram P. Fish. None of them turned out to be the main investigator who actually solved 2 of the crimes. That turned out to be Anthony Cade, the South African adventurer, who, surprise, surprise, was more than he seemed. It was just all over the place. Like you said, I needed a spreadsheet. I needed, Post-it notes. I needed something. It was too complex. I ended up only reading it in short bursts. And there was a couple of points where Agatha Christie literally put the brakes on the narrative and had somebody ask the question, what's going on here? And then another character would do a whole exposition dump of everything that had happened in the plot up to that point. And I was like, I'm glad she did that at least twice in the book, because I got up to speed as well as the characters. So, I think if you've got to do that, if you've got to have a character ask what is going on here and have another character explain everything, then your plot's too complicated. It was just all over the place for me. On the plus side, I love the fact that I actually had a chapter devoted to my birthday. Thank you very much, Agatha Christie. And I'm sure you did that on purpose.
I bet she did. And I would have said, I feel it was better because I sat down and read it, because it kept it going and everything was fresh in my mind. I think with this kind of book, for me, that is the best way to read them. I understand that you found it was too much, but I felt it was easier. You got that everything in your mind. And as it went on, it seemed easier to see what might happen next.
Good point. Maybe I read it at the wrong time of day. So I tend to read these like as my nighttime read just before I go to sleep. I read a chunk of the books. And maybe, reading 3-4 chapters at a time. And then as I was starting to feel tired, maybe I would have been better reading it during the day, sat out on the balcony with a nice cup of coffee, like early morning when my mind was fresh or something, and read it for slightly longer. Maybe I might have picked out more rather than reading it while I was tired.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how that works, but I found for me, I did the same with the man in the brown suit too. And I found everything flowed better if I just kept going. And I'm lucky I have the time to be able to do that too. What did you think about the setting?
Again, early in the book, Agatha Christie actually makes an in-universe observation that Chimneys is so well known that she doesn't need to describe it, because it's in all these books that the people in this universe have in their libraries, and it's well discussed in the newspapers, and it's in multiple guidebooks. Therefore, she doesn't have to describe it. I found it interesting early in the book that she actually went out and said that. I thought that was really sort of putting a stake in the ground as like, I'm fed up of describing every country house and how the drawing rooms fit together and blah, blah, blah. I wish she had, because I just got confused again. I guess it was meant to be just the generic country mansion manor house type thing. So I found what I ended up doing in my mind was basically taking the model of Churchill's house, Chartwell, because one, I've been there, and two, we watched a movie about Churchill's latter days set there, which mainly took place in the house. So that sort of gave me a mental picture of a grand country estate that would be used by a senior politician type thing. So I sort of projected Chartwell into the story, and that helped me navigate Chimneys, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. That makes total sense.
What about you? Did you get any sense of place from it?
No, I didn't get any sense of place from any of it, to be honest. And I thought it was a real shame there wasn't some kind of description of Chimneys, because it was a character in the book. The windows, whether it was the second or the third window from the whatever, was important with that light coming on, as was where the council chamber was, and that it had 3 windows in a row, and that whether one was open or not, or whether it was just jammed because it was old. That was really important in the plot. And so I felt like she missed something there, because I'm obviously not as smart as you, because I didn't think to stick something else in my mind. I guess what I actually did was, because I'd watched the adaptation before, I can't maybe have the picture of that in my mind. But I did find it irritating, because I wasn't really quite sure how to picture some of it in my head, because the house was such a big character. So I thought she missed a step there, but I also understand it gets tedious creating or describing these big houses.
Yeah, very different to Styles.
Yes.
I know when we did the Styles episode, I said I didn't get too much of a sense of place, but the house itself, probably because she did provide maps in the book, I could sort of figure out the logistics of where the rooms were and how they worked together. This one I really couldn't. And like I said, the only way to really visualize it was to take a place I'd been and seen recently on TV and think, oh, yeah, it must have been something like this in my mind. So,
yeah, it is a bit of a problem, because it's like, oh, we're going to the council chamber. Is that 3 doors down? Is that 1 door down? Can you hear anything from there? All that kind of stuff. One of the few times I'd have liked a map, and we don't get one.
I also find it interesting she used the thing council chamber, and we'll get to the adaptation later, but it was like, what does a council chamber room look like? Because she didn't even really describe the room.
No.
She described things in the room, but she never really described the room. And then when we got to the adaptation and that set, and I'm like, okay, I can see why that sort of room would be called a council chamber. But in the book, it was like, that just seems a weird, name for a room.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that was because of trying to put it in position as a really old house. They had council meetings or something in there. I don't know.
I just had a thought. I don't know.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, I know, exciting. This is a fresh thought, folks, not scripted, hot off the press. If there was something going on with a major house somewhere like Chequers or Chartwell or one of those big country estates at the time, and a particular house was in the news, was in the papers, was being talked about when she wrote it, and it was published, and it was like, oh, well, I'm calling it Chimneys, but people will know what I'm referring to, because I think it's meant to be Chequers. That's the country house of the British Prime Minister, folks, who aren't in the UK. People reading the book in 1925 would go, oh, yeah, I know that's Chequers. And
that's that house, yeah.
That's that house, and it's been all over the papers, therefore I know it. Hence the thing up front about, I don't need to describe it because you all know what it looks like. I wonder if there was something in the news or in the sort of cultural zeitgeist at the moment that everybody knew what Chimneys was meant to be.
Yeah, because when you're, as you know, when you're writing a book, you're not necessarily writing for longevity.
You're hoping for it, but
Well, you're hoping for it, but I don't even know at that time if she was. She was just writing. And I wonder if, that's why that doesn't work for us now. Because like you said, people would have known what house it was at the time. It would have been able to say, oh, yeah, that was there. Yeah, good point.
I wonder if that's where that treaty was signed that I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
So it was all over the papers. I didn't dig into that.
You're going to have to do that now.
I think I hijacked your thread there. So it's back to you for what you thought of the characters.
Okay, so this is the first time we meet Superintendent Battle. I liked the way it was written. I liked the way he interacted with the other characters. Kind of picture in my mind. I liked that. I feel that allowing for the number of characters in this, most of them came across with definite personalities and traits that made it easier to keep them straight. I think, anyway, I thought Lord Caterham was absolutely delightful. I enjoyed his little petulant outbursts about not being left on his own, and maybe he was going to go on holiday abroad because he just wasn't into all this stuff anymore. I just thought he was written really well, and you were kind of hoping for his sake that he'd get some peace and quiet at some point. His daughter, Lady Eileen Caterham, known as Bundle for some reason, I remember her having more of a part. Maybe it's for the other one that Chimneys is in, that she has a bigger part in that one. I don't know. Spoiler alert. I felt like she got gypped a bit. She had a decent character. She had a good character, but she kind of got pushed into the background by all the other characters and sometimes sounded a bit wistful. I felt a bit sorry for her in that respect. I do want to know why she made that statement about why she would marry George Lomax at some point. As he in a book, he seems like a pompous bully. Why anyone would think that being married to someone like that was a good idea, I don't know. I loved his name, Codders. I loved the fact they didn't explain that or Bundle. He was very easy to picture, very definite archetype of a pompous, self-important politician. I'm assuming Bill Eversley was meant to be a bit of a loser because that's how he came across. He was probably one of the least well-drawn characters. I did like how they called Baron Lollipop, which acknowledged how complicated the names were, and it also helped keep his character in place, for me anyway. But as I said, I think allowing for the number of characters, they all seem to have definite personality traits, which I thought was quite clever in a relatively short book with a lot going on. What did you think, Alan?
I think this is where we disagree. One of the other areas we disagree about this one. I looked it up. The Wikipedia page lists 28 different characters. Some of them have multiple identities. In one case, I think like 4 different in the narrative. So yeah, I needed a score sheet. I needed my Excel spreadsheet to keep up with who was who. And there was new characters kept popping up all the time. Like the Code Breaker suddenly pops up, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through the book. I mean, there's only maybe like 10 small chapters left. And suddenly we got this new Codebreaker character popping up, and it's like, oh no, not somebody else I need to keep track of. So yeah, that didn't really work for me. I don't think I was helped by the actual edition we were reading, because the blurb on the back cover of the edition we have positions it as a story about Virginia Revel. She's the only character mentioned on the back of the book. So I was expecting her to be a character in the sort of similar to Anne in Man in the Brown Suit, that it would be her story and she would be this strong heroine character and stuff, which it was not. She was not the central character. She sort of was at the beginning, but then towards the end, hardly in it. And even right at the end, disappearing for several chapters. So that didn't help. And the multi-threaded plot, similar thing here. For a long time, I wasn't sure whose story this was. And of course, it turns out to be Anthony Cates. He really is the closest character to actually having a through line all the way through the story. I think if I went back and reread it now, knowing that it was his story, I might take a slightly different tack on it and understand it a bit better. But yeah, to me, I'm sort of disagreeing with you on the fact that they were all had some discernible character traits, because they didn't to me. The only characters that had any real personality for me were Lord Caterham, who I absolutely adored. I thought he was wonderful. Lady Ellen, aka Bundle, weird nickname. Interesting to find out. From what you just said, it sounds like her and the house reappear in another book, so maybe we'll
do, yes.
I don't know if her nickname gets explained at one point. Very 1920s, upper-class British nickname. And to a lesser extent, Anthony Cade and Virginia Revel, but basically everybody else, especially the 3 detectives. I found the 3 detectives completely uninspiring. And everybody else, just particularly the Herzo-Slovakian nobles. That word's easier to say than it is to read. That's weird. those names, like you said, they were hard to pronounce. I couldn't keep them straight in my head. I couldn't figure out who was who and what their significance was. And again, not helped by the fact that, one of them was taking on multiple names and they had nicknames. So again, I don't know if it's part of me being tired when I read it or reading it at the end of the day, but I found the whole characters, to a large extent, very confusing, very uninspiring, very thinly drawn, except for, as I said, maybe the four that I mentioned. So.
Well, at least we agreed on the fact that Lord Caterham was adorable.
Yes, we did. He was very good.
He was.
Which sort of leads me to talking of words that are difficult to pronounce, the denouement. To be honest, I couldn't have cared less by the time we got to the end of the book about the reveals. I was just glad to get it over with and get all these multiple storylines to an end. I just wanted it all down. And the murderer, I really didn't care about the murderer or the murderer by the end of the book. And it turns out that the murderer was a character who was it was off page for most of the book, was just mentioned a few times, then disappeared off to another country. But it's not like Styles, where the murderer disappeared for a particular reason and then came back and was integral. I don't know. It just didn't work for me at all. And the thing about where the diamond was located, I thought, when I read the chapter about the rose garden, I'm like, oh, okay, I know where the diamond's hidden. Again, the reveal that one of them was one of the assassinated royals. When I read that line about, after Posey's assassination, the bodies were mutilated beyond recognition, I'm like, okay, one or both of them's coming back at some point. So I caught that one. I hated, again, like the end of The Man in the Brown Suit, the hero turns out to be the rich adventurer or the handsome prince, the long-lost earl, blah, blah, blah. I don't like that. So that ending was the ending overall was a disappointment to me. I'm not being very positive about this one, am I?
You don't have to be. You don't have to
No,
be.
I know. It's the point of the podcast, but yeah. Anyway, what did you think about the end of the plot?
Well, it really didn't stand up to the promise of the plot and the fun of the plot. I was disappointed that Anthony Cade, a.k.a. Prince, whatever his name turned out to be, and Virginia Revel got married off page. Two things. These impulsive relationships are everywhere in her writing, and I just don't get them at all. And the story that was told about Virginia Revel doing everything for her first husband because she didn't love him, like I said, the book made her hard to read, whether she was just being her delightful self or whether there was any emotion behind it. All that just seemed a bit odd. Like I said before, I felt Bundle deserved more than she got. And the fact that Bill Eversley went off and proposed to some other woman who hadn't even been in the book was very perplexing. Of course, we all knew the French governess was important, right? That gets mentioned several times. So you knew she was going to be important, and she ended up being fairly important.
You may have spotted that, but I didn't.
Well, he went and did that stuff, making that effort. She used, again, in a short book, that used up a lot of page. That means it's important in a short book. Maybe it's because I've read a lot of Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Niall Marsh, Marjorie Allingham, all those lovely people, Josephine Tay, don't tend to waste words. If something gets mentioned a couple of times, it's a good idea to keep it in the back of your mind. I hadn't worked out she was the, so say, assassinated, unpopular music hall actress turned queen, but I wasn't surprised that she was involved in the whole murder plot stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that's part of learning the tropes of Christie as we go along, and I'm obviously going to start picking up on these style things that you already know.
Yeah, very true. And with that, we'll go to the writing. As I said before, the humor in this one, I really enjoyed the light touch. A couple of times it went awfully close to farce. And for me, I know you didn't like Battle, but I feel like if it wasn't for Superintendent Battle and Lord Caterham, I think it would have devolved into farce. But I just also felt that she was having fun writing this one. I felt like that leapt right off the page for me. What did you think, Alan?
Okay, it's fairly obvious now I was not really a fan of this one in terms of plot and characters. But boy, did I enjoy her writing here. The whole thing had a wonderful undertone of sarcasm and highlighting the stupidity and entitlement of the aristocracy and the weekend partying class. I thought she exhibited a biting and wicked sense of humour here in some of the descriptions of what people were doing, or the underhanded sarcasm of some of her observations around people's attitudes and behaviour was wonderful to read. I know there was a few times I laughed out loud reading it, and it was not because of what was happening in the plot. It was about her use of language.
Yeah, I agree. Brilliant. Just brilliant writing.
So I loved the writing in it. And I also like the book ending by having the first and last chapters done as if they are a set of stage directions. I was going to say screenplay, but it's a bit early for a screenplay. But as if she's describing the action as if somebody's going to stage it or whatever, as opposed to the rest of the book was done in a normal third-person narrative. But that first and last chapter, I thought was a very interesting way of bookending the story. So I like that. So yeah, not a fan of the story, not a fan of the way it was laid out, not really a fan of most of the characters, not a fan of the way it was resolved. But boy, I loved the way it was written.
No, me too. Me too. So, are there any other things we want to discuss? I was just going to say for me, no, just hoping other books don't have as many characters to keep track of. How about you, Alan?
Just a couple of things. I think we touched on this. I mean, you mentioned that Bundle and Chimneys gets mentioned elsewhere. I've heard and seen Inspector Battle's name banded around on various forums that we now, contribute to and are on, and some of the Agatha Christie threads online and stuff. So I'm assuming, even though this is a standalone story, he, a bit like Colonel Race in The Man in the Brown Suit, is somebody who is something of a recurring character throughout other standalone stories. I mean, he doesn't have a series like Poirot or Marple or whatever, does he?
No, he doesn't. No.
Okay. So he's another one of these characters that gets dropped into standalone stories.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope he gets fleshed out a bit more. I didn't really get much of a sense of him here. I know you did, but I didn't.
And just for reference, the other book's name is The Seven Dials Mystery.
Spoiler alert. My other thing is, it's not so much a question. I just really enjoyed seeing the direct references to Sherlock Holmes and particularly Arsène Lupin, because we've talked a bit before about how some of the earlier stuff she's done is very Conan Doyle-esque, particularly with some of the early Poirot. I guess it's a bit of that, I get that reference, because we both love Sherlock Holmes. I love the Lupin stories I've read. Yeah, it was just fun seeing that. Not really a question, just an observation.
I'll let you off with that one. Adaptations. What were they, Alan?
First off, there was a stage adaptation in 1931. It was adapted by Agatha Christie herself into a stage play in 1931, but it was cancelled. But the notes don't say why it was cancelled. She placed a copy in the British Library where it was located and provided to her daughter, at whose request its existence was not revealed publicly. It's interesting. We need to dig into why the family wanted to keep it hidden. And anyway, 20 years later, another copy surfaced in Canada, where obviously the family did not have the reach, and it actually received its world premiere on 16th of October 2003. I didn't go looking. I wonder if there's a recording of it somewhere online. But I'm just intrigued as to why it seems the family didn't want it staged. So,
yeah, me too. Me too. It's very curious, isn't it?
Yeah. So if anybody knows, let us know. Of course, we have our regular TV adaptation from ITV. Mysteriously, as an episode of The Marple Show, is included in the 5th series of Marple with Julie Mackenzie as Miss Marple. It uses the house Chimneys as the setting, includes some of the characters, a little bit of the plot. We'll talk about that. And Miss Marple is inserted as the main detective, and it actually also throws in bits from a Marple short story called Herb of Death, which of course I know nothing about because we've got nowhere near that. So we, of course, had to sit down and watch Miss Marple in The Secret of Chimneys. What did you reckon to this somewhat strange adaptation, Jill?
Well, I think I'll go along with the Radio Times observation, if I can read that out. It says, classic Agatha Christie, even though it's only distantly related to her original. Purists will be utterly flummoxed, and the plot has more holes in it than the murder victim. And yes, Chimneys is still there, but mysteriously they changed Lord Caterham's actual name to make Virginia Ravel one of his daughters. Diamond's still there, but apart from that, there's really not much that's the same, which really should have made it an absolutely terrible adaptation. But once I decided to let go of all that, the flow got better. It wasn't perfect, but it was watchable. And while I understand adapting a book for the small screen necessitates changes, I'm not sure why so much was changed. If you ignore Miss Marple being added, as she has been in other standalone adventures, and I know some people can't ignore that, and I appreciate that reasoning. For this story, it doesn't bother me half as much as changing the detective's name, changing the murderer, adding characters who have no reason at all to be there and adding an extra murder just because they can. The changes weren't like, oh, yeah, I can see why they did that. You know, they moved it forward. It was set in 1955. I don't know why. I don't know what they were special about 1955. They felt they were going to do it, but I don't really understand that either. Poor old Bendel gets the short end of the stick again. She gets fed some terrible lines and a terrible character. George Lomax, I mean, well acted, I will say, but he was every woman's worst nightmare. Made me shudder whenever he looked at Virginia. When they did that little kiss at the end, I was like, whoa. Great acting, but whoa. But the more I thought about it afterwards when I was writing this and thinking about it, the worse it gets. It had a clearer story in some respect, but they sucked all the fun and lightness out of that story. It was very plodding. And I think that's about one of the worst things you can say about a TV show you're watching. We paused it at one point because we needed chocolate, because everybody needs chocolate watching TV, right? And it said we're only 10 minutes in, and we were both like, oh my God, only 10 minutes. You've got another hour and 20 minutes to go. So that goes to show, first 10 minutes were a bit ploddy. I think I better stop there. I could ramble on for hours about this episode. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, we've got to keep the podcast down to less than an hour. So.
Yeah.
To be honest, if I'd known nothing about this story, if I'd never read the story, never really heard about it, and you just sat me down and watched it, I think I would have enjoyed this as a pretty good whodunit. I think I had a great cast. A lot of, not sort of stars, but people I recognise from other quality British TV shows. So it was a good cast. To your point, I think it was very well acted. I think everybody played their parts really well. It had a good sense of place and time. It had to be 1955, so Miss Marple could arrive in that beautiful Austin Healey.
Oh, is that what?
They didn't start making those till 1955, so...
Okay, well, that makes total sense then.
Car geek, sorry. Watching it, my thoughts and ideas on who the murderer was kept switching throughout the episode, which is good, gets you thinking. I also have very little knowledge of Miss Marple, her character or methods at this point. So having her dropped into this story really didn't cause many problems. So I don't have that relationship with the character. And I especially liked the relationship between her and the police inspector. As he began to realise how he could sort of utilise her talents, he was sort of dismissive of her at the beginning as the amateur detective who's shown up too many people in Scotland Yard, but she's not going to show me up. And then sort of as it got through towards the end, he was like, oh, I'm another one of your victims because you actually did stuff and made me realise that I was focusing on the missing diamond to the detriment of seeing the bigger picture of what was really going on. I like that. I love the scene where they're all like, but what about the diamond? And she just casually goes over to her handbag and picks it out of her handbag, walks over and hands it to them. I just thought that was wonderful. So as a standalone whodunit show, TV murder mystery, I enjoyed it. But then I have to think about it as an actual adaptation of Secret of Chimneys, and oh boy, was it horrible from that aspect. I did like that they chose to only focus on two aspects of the original plot, the missing diamond and the murder of the visiting count, as he was in the TV show. I think that simplified things, made it, as you said, made it clearer. I'm glad they changed his nationality to Austrian. It's a little easier to pronounce and to follow. But they reduced the cast of characters up to a point. So all that was positive. But otherwise, in the adaptation, it was way off. Some of the characters were basically the same in name and position. Others were changed, as Jill said, especially Virginia Revel becoming Lord Caterham's daughter. Other changes seemed completely unnecessary, such as changing the police inspector's name and character, introduction of new characters like the National Heritage Lady who's trying to buy chimneys, the murdered maid Agnes, and so forth. Yeah, it was a fun country house mystery story, but despite what the title said, it wasn't The Secret of Chimneys. Good mystery, bad adaptation, in my opinion.
I can agree with that, yes.
Back to you for any other adaptations.
Yes, there was a graphic novel adaptation in 2007. The Secret of Chimneys was released by HarperCollins as a graphic novel adaptation on the 20th of August in 2007. It was adapted by Francois Rivière and illustrated by Laurence Schooner. This was translated from the edition first published in France in 2002. We don't have a copy of this one in our collection, and it appears to be one with a very low print run. It's currently selling for around $65 secondhand on eBay, and that was a little bit rich for our blood. maybe if we get hold of a copy one day, we'll do a review of it. Or if you have one and you want to send us your review, that would be great. Now we've reached my favorite quote stage of the podcast. And this one is back being from Agatha herself. But Styles proved what it had been in the past to others. It was an unlucky house. I felt it when we first went into it. I put my fancy down to the fact that the decorations were so flashy and unnatural for the country. When we could afford to have it done up in a country style without all this paneling, paint and gilt, then I said it would feel different. That was from Agatha Christie's autobiography, and the link for that will be in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. If you would like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, a link for which will be in the show notes. Or you can find us on social media. Where can you be found?
I can be found on the Chronological Christie Instagram account. Looking forward to chatting with you there.
And I can be found on most social media platforms by searching for @AlanJPorter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. And if you want to keep up with our various writing projects, you can sign up for our free bi-weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books discussed on this podcast can be found on a dedicated Chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will be in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode, where we will be presenting another Q&A mini episode following up on questions asked in our discussions of The Man in the Brown Suit and the Poirot Investigates collection of short stories. Following that, in our next regular episode, we will be discussing the murder of Roger Ackroyd. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra and is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrid Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.